Here we are in Unit 5, the irrigation portion, and it's my favorite because I get to talk about water.
So now when we talk about agriculture, of course we need to water our crops or our animals, and we're going to take a look at in which ways we can do this. So we live on the blue planet, and why do we call it that? Because the Earth's surface is covered in almost 3/4 in water, and that seems like a lot of water. So what's our problem? But honestly, the majority of that water, almost 98% of that water, is salt water in our oceans. And we can't drink that or water our crops with that. So, really, we need to concern ourselves with how much fresh water we have, which is not that much, right? So, we're looking at about 2.5% fresh water on Earth. And of that fresh water, almost 80% of that is locked into ice caps and glaciers. So, that is not available to us. Then, right, we have about 20% of it locked in groundwater, which we pump out. And then the rest of it is in surface water with a little bit of atmospheric water, or AKA water vapor. So, really, the water available to us to drink and to water our crops and our animals is actually not that much. Water is so important. I would say the most important resource, but you guys know what a fan I am of water. So, you know, I have a bias, but water is super poorly managed. And why? Because it's kind of cheap and we're like, oh, it'll come from wherever, but really it doesn't. We really have to concern ourselves because as you guys saw, we actually don't have that much of it when you look as water on usable water on the planet. Um, right? Water is important for when it comes to disease. It's super inequitable across the globe who has access to safe drinking water. Babies are dying of waterborne disease, and we flush our toilets with drinkable water. Crazy. Economics, you need water to produce food and energy. If you don't have it, you can't produce that food and energy. Um, Global security, right, water doesn't know any boundaries, and so when there's shared access, there are wars that are fought over this, so there are security issues there. And then of course there are all kinds of environmental issues when we look at the decrease of fresh water. But really importantly, across the entire world, the majority of water that is used is in irrigation. So 70% of the water that we use around the world is used for irrigating crops. And so how do we get that water? Well, we get it through precipitation and ice melt. So it can either run off or infiltrate down into the ground or evaporate. So, that's where we get our fresh water from. And surface water are, right, streams, rivers, ponds, wetlands, wherever there is water above the surface. And that surface runoff recharges surface waters. And so did groundwater actually as well. But, um, and great, that's awesome, right? But that is a finite amount of water. We have a very small amount of water when you look at how much fresh water is available on Earth. And so 20% of that fresh water is groundwater. And groundwater is really important because that's where we get most of our drinking water from. And groundwater gets gets recharged through infiltration. So, right, it precipitates and the water percolates through the ground, infiltrates through the ground down into an aquifer. And so you have this area of soil that's completely full of water. So there's no air in there. All those pore spaces are filled, and um, that is called the zone of saturation. The top of the zone of saturation is called the water table. And so below the water table is our aquifer, and this is where we get our water from when we pump it out. Now, when we do pump it out, we can get it from a unconfined aquifer, which is really exposed to the surface or the soil, or we can get it from from a confined aquifer, where it is underneath some confining layer of some sort, or an aquitard, right? And usually clay, where water does not permeate very easily. So it's a lot more protected. And because it's a lot more protected, it's less likely to be contaminated than the unconfined aquifer, because the unconfined aquifer is exposed to whatever we do on the ground. And so here's a picture of Long Island, and the Magothy aquifer is their unconfined aquifer, and underneath it is the Lloyd aquifer. And that Magothy aquifer is not 100%, completely contaminated, mostly by septic systems. So there's a lot of nitrate pollution and stuff like that, totally unusable. So people on Long Island actually get their water from the Lloyd aquifer. They've tapped into that confined aquifer. And so to get that water out, it'll either naturally percolate out of the ground from a spring. I don't know if you've been like driving down the road and you see water just kind of randomly coming out of a rock. That's groundwater, like just coming out of the ground. But more often than not, right, we're withdrawing water. So we drill a well, it's dug into the aquifer, and we pump it out. There's a screen there to keep all the sediment out. But mostly, right, we are looking at a water table well, which is in an unconfined aquifer. An artesian well is actually when it gets down into a confined aquifer. So it can be natural recharge where it's just percolating downwards, or it can come in through the side where it's actually getting replenished by that surface water, like I said before. And right, it's water. Of course, it's a sustainable resource. We have so much of it, but right, they can get contaminated, so it's unusable to us. Or we're removing it faster than it's replenished, and then it doesn't have time to recharge, and we don't have enough water. And so in the United States, aquifers supply almost all the drinking water in rural areas, and just about a third in urban areas. But that we have a lot of rural area in the US. And so we're pumping it very, very fast, and it just cannot get replenished fast enough. Ogallala is the major aquifer in the United States. You can see where it is in the middle of the country, and towards the south of it, where we grow all of this, right? Not only is it dry, but we're also growing a lot of food, and so we're pumping it out to irrigate our crops. And so you can see, right, that you have this thickness of the aquifer in the north. It's actually pretty good. It's a good size. But in the south, in these arid areas, the places where we're actually growing food, like in Kansas and Oklahoma, right, we're pumping that out really fast and to water our crops, and it's not recharging fast enough. So we have major aquifer depletion. There are really high concentrations of nitrates from those synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides as well are in that aquifer, so not very good to drink. And not only that, because we're pumping it out, the fresh water that that would normally feed the wetlands and whatnot is decreasing. And so because those freshwater sources is decreasing the actual ecosystem itself, we have a decrease in biodiversity. So we do use that water to irrigate our crops, and most methods are actually super inefficient, especially when it comes to large-scale farming. Just want to do it, get it done fast, so it's done with minimal effort. And so the first kind is flood irrigation, where the entire field gets flooded with water, and it infiltrates down into the ground, right? But it will also run off, and then right, that soil gets saturated, and the roots can get water. Another kind is furrow irrigation. So the water gets pumped through these channels and then the water gets into the plants that way. And then spray irrigation is just basically a big sprinkler that just sprinkles the top of these plants. But the take home here is that it's actually super inefficient. We lose a lot of water to evaporation. And why do we do that? Well, water is cheap, so who cares, right? But we are depleting our resources. And so we can also get certain issues like salinization and waterlogging if we water them, especially in like flood methods where you're completely covering the crops. If you are like repeatedly irrigating your crop yield, um, the water table will rise because that water percolates down into the earth. And with that, right, the water table rises and you end up with your roots right in that zone of saturation. And you'll get root rot. So the roots do not like that. There's also some air exchange happening in those roots. And so if there's water there, there's no air. So so ultimately your plants are not very happy. Um, Another issue that can happen is that if you irrigate and you're just watering over and over and over again instead of directing it, the excess water just evaporates off and leaves the salts behind, and the salts build up in the soil, and that is not good for your plants either. So you can see, right? This is what happens. This is like super salinated, but you know, you get the picture. Well, obviously you get the picture because there's a picture. Okay, that was stupid. But anyway, right, there's this gradual accumulation of salt in the soil because you just keep watering it and watering it, and you have excess, you have the excess water getting evaporated, leaving those salts behind, and it happens in a lot of dry areas. So there are more efficient techniques of irrigation, or there's this low energy precision application sprinkler. So you can see the difference here in this picture is actually these tubes that are actually dragging on the ground and watering the plants, you know, by the ground, but still moving along it. Or there's drip irrigation where you have these small pinholes in the tubing and is delivering water at a very slow rate, very close to the roots. So the plants are just getting what they need.